So, just to give a quick refresh of why we started this collective session with Cecile is because, we've known each other for years and we both work in macro trends, in long-term visions of the future. And she's in Paris, I'm in London, and I focus more on fashion and lifestyle, and Cecile focuses more on lifestyle, and we have this type of cross expertise that completes each other really nicely. And we really feel that we are in a time more than ever of deep collaboration, and we really wanted to have this very open conversation and bring everyone together. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the idea. So that's why we decided to start a collaboration, an ongoing project that we call Reconnect, because we think that through the crisis that we are living, we know that we need really profound changes, that also the time that we are spending home is a good opportunity to reflect on things. And so that's why we are happy to be with you once again today. So the subject of this episode number 2 of our Reconnect series is about the ethical implication of the future of transparency and resilience. Because now we are imagining a world and a life post-COVID, and we want to think about how we can consider personalization and customization. So I would like to ask Geraldine the first question. How do you see the idea of personalization connected to the future of fashion?
I mean, for me, there's a huge connection, and obviously personalization and customization is something we've been seeing for a while come into the fashion space. But it's great because in terms of sustainability and in a more ethical way, it means producing what people actually really want, and potentially, producing, manufacturing intelligently so that we are not just predicting what we think the customers will want, but we are actually connecting through different technologies, data, etc., and really delivering what they truly want, so the product doesn't end up in landfills or being burnt or being discounted. And so I think this next step of fashion is this extreme way of B2C. And in a way, it's very similar to what fashion used to be before ready to wear. So that's cool. It's a return to craft also that will be important as part of this, which is what we talked about during the last session. And what I'm really excited about also is the end user becoming a part of the supply chain and forming a type of creative, social, and commercial contract with a brand, so that through personalization, there's a huge opportunity to redefine how the end user interacts with the product even before it's finished. Maybe they're part of that personalization process and they enable it. So that's kind of what I think about in terms of fashion. I wanted to ask you the question, Cecile, in terms of where you see also the customization and the experience, of it in terms of what we are going through at this time. Where do you see this going?
Maybe I think it's important maybe to speak very quickly about human-centered design, because for me, human-centered design is somehow one of the roots of customization. So human-centered design is a method, it's a way of designing things so that you really address the core needs of people. And you try to solve a problem by a very well-designed experience, can be a product or a service. So the whole idea, I think, for me, is that in the future, we're going to use more and more human-centered design, because for me, the future is really about the people. It's not that much about the brand, as you said, but it's really about the experience and the people. So today, brands have different solutions to try to be closer to the needs of people, personalization, which is mainly done by brand. And then you have customization and also DIY, which is mainly done by the people. So I think today with the lockdown of 3.5 billion of people, we are at home. And last week we explained that COVID is really a kind of activator of trends. So one of the trends that we saw for already several months is the growing importance of the concept of self as a large idea. So we saw this idea of self-care getting more and more important on Instagram, about accepting yourself, about being proud of your imperfection. And with the confinement, we have more and more to take care of ourselves because we are alone, because many products are difficult to find, or maybe the shops are not open. So it means that we rely a lot on ourselves. That's why so many people are baking instead of going to the bakery shop. So everything today is really centered around ourselves and our home. So I would say that when we speak about customization, it's really something done for myself and by myself. And what we see today is that we are completely focused on ourselves. We are paying attention to how can we do self-healing, can we do self-education, self-indulgence. We are cutting our hair ourselves because we can't go to the hairdresser.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the time you just take care of the front, which is what I do, and you don't take care of the back because you don't see it on Zoom. So we bake our bread, we imagine, new ritual to try to heal ourselves. We're looking for virtual guidance to help us, like online meditation and more. So what I think is that this self-sufficiency is opening a very large new market. And I think at the end, with this quest of well-being, it's going to be huge in the future, because what we want at the end is really to do good to ourselves. So that's why we are buying tea, candles, pajama, socks, and soap, the things that we need. So for me, beauty and body products are going to be very important in the future. We can, of course, make them ourselves. Completely DIY. But we are also relying on brands that are very dealing with brands that are really sustainable and working with collaborative action to help us to find a way to make this customization. For me, the brands that are going to be important in the future are really the ones that are going to empower the people, because for me, the future is really about the people and not that much about the product or the services. And and I think when we speak about the people, I know that you've been working a lot on biometric data. So maybe you can share some thoughts about that with us.
Yeah. And I'll just add to your point about well-being. A couple of sessions ago, we talked about systems change and economic models. And, within that fits in the idea of the well-being economy, which I encourage everyone to obviously look into. I just want to add, before answering your question, that we will go into questions again at the end of the session, so at the end of our little exchange. So make sure, everyone, as we talk, that you type in your questions so that we can, jump straight into it. But to answer your question, Cecile, I'm fascinated with biometric data because there's this phenomenon of gamification of fashion at the moment, where we're utilizing haptic tools that are normally used in mixed reality and video games, and now able to bring them in to the functions of the clothing that can sense your body metrics, your temperature, your heart rate, etc. And so customization in the future, especially at a time where we're so aware of our health, and so hyper aware of how to protect our immune system, there's going to be this new value exchange of the data that we share, our biometric data that we share with brands, and it's going to be key to define also how we keep agency over that data. But speaking of beauty, I was just talking with a brand today, a hair care brand, and a lot of what they do are through questionnaires. where they're able to see which, not necessarily a product that is just for you. It's not like a DNA based product, although that's also another trend, but it's like more what type of person you fall into. So in the future, maybe fashion, it will not necessarily be about exactly you and your personal biometric data, but it'll be about the group you fall into. And you know, brands have been experimenting with this for a while, this idea of wearables that also have health functions. But it would be interesting to see how that can tie into also an ethical agenda, you know, of making sure we still, where is our data going? And I think in Europe we already have laws, but in America that's a bit more tricky. You know, we'll see also depending on the regions, but yeah. So it's something to track, and it's something hopefully that can also make clothing more intelligent again, and clothing become a part of the healthcare system, of the technology industry, and all of these kind of lines blurring. So, and you know, it makes me think also when we talk about that, of this idea of, you know, blurring boundaries between industries, and how flexible we need to become, and how collaborative we need to become. And I was wondering also, you know, we talked about this, and you have a lot of ideas about this, Cecile, if you could like say.
Yeah, because as you said, I think flexibility is something really important. Globally, as a human species, we are flexible. This is a part of our deep human nature. We are able to, to adapt ourselves to a new surrounding, a new environment. And I think today we are facing a very important crisis, and we know that every important event could be a war, it could be 9/11, or it could be a pandemic. Every of those important events has really changed the way we live and the way we function, but also has make some innovation possible. So I think if we go back a bit in the past, like one of the biggest pandemia was the Black Death during the 14th century in Europe. And after that, there were less people working because a lot of them were dead. So they were working harder and they were being paid more. And one of the innovations that we saw at that moment, it was the clocks and the hour glasses. So that they know how many hours they have been working, and they keep a track of time. We know that, for instance, the e-commerce in China was really boosted after 2002, when there was the severe acute respiratory syndrome, because people were staying at home, so they started to buy online. So what we know is that pandemics are really a way to catalyze innovation and accelerate change. And what we see is that already the COVID-19 is changing everything. We are seeing a kind of new normal with this flexibility and capacity of adaptation. So before the COVID, for instance, remote worker was something that was already on the rise, but now it's just, you know, working from home, that's just very normal. So I think in a way, if I want to see that in an optimistic way, I would say that flexibility for human people is somehow a kind of superpower. So I think with that, we can really try to make the best of the future, because we have this capacity of you know, adapt ourselves, which is great.
Yeah.
And maybe, maybe we should jump into our second big question. So, and this is the idea you spoke before about collaboration, and we are speaking also about how imagining how transparency and resilience can work together in the future for, of course, a human-centered future. So my question, Geraldine, would be, I know that you are very much interested in something that is super deep, a very big concept, a philosophical thought, which is called transparency. And so maybe you could share with us some insight about this concept?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about transparency in terms of what it actually means, you know, for an industry, but also in terms of what it means emotionally and philosophically, you know, on an existential level. And I'll just start a bit with what transparency means in fashion. It's a buzzword, you know, and especially since the Rana Plaza disaster, everybody talked about being more transparent. And recently, Virgil Abloh, in his Vogue talk, said fashion should serve humanity, not vanity. And, you know, this echoes this idea that transparency is about justice. And again, it goes back to this idea of design being a social choice, a social intention and action more than ever. And essentially what transparency is, you know, and this is about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is to end poverty in all its form everywhere in the world. And that's the UN Sustainable Goal number 1. And obviously that then fall under that, you know, climate action, which is goal 13, goal 6, which is clean water and biodiversity and sanitation. Goal 14 is life below water, and goal 15 is protecting, you know, and restoring our ecosystems and biodiversity. So that's a little bit of geeking out on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But how does transparency link to poverty, link to fashion? Well, fashion, low pay is systemic, modern day slavery, forced labor, child labor, human trafficking, and women and girls are really susceptible to that. And there's also within that debt bondage. And so when we talk about this idea of a crisis fast tracking change, and for the better, it can also actually fast track some real problems. And at the moment, we're facing the stepping backwards and potentially child labor and modern slavery becoming a big problem again as some countries are facing humanitarian crisis. So it's about really fashion companies ensuring that human rights are met. And if they do not know where and how the clothing is being made or accessories, they cannot ensure this, essentially. And so we have a very complex supply chain, and a lot of people claim they are transparent, and there's a lot of greenwashing. But it's about, you know, holding brands, I guess, accountable. And so it's a really complex topic before I even go in the philosophical aspect, which I will go into next. But you know, there's the Fashion Transparency Index that came out this week by Fashion Revolution. And essentially, it's ranked H&M as the highest in transparency. And yes, H&M is doing a lot, but there's a fundamental problem when this report says that high street brands lead on transparency. So transparency is one thing in the cogwheel of a greater approach, spiritual approach to what sustainability is. And because how can that be? What does that say that they lead in transparency? What it's saying is that they're throwing data, they're throwing a lot of words, and that's what the report also says. They're throwing a lot of information to kind of confuse people also into understanding what they're actually doing, but there's no way that fast fashion brands are leading in transparency. So obviously with transparency, technology can facilitate that, like blockchain and things like this, but on a more existential level, transparency, it's more than a system, it's more than a technology. You know, it's a mindset, and it's about truly deeply reconnecting with our connection, which we've lost, to the origin of things, to how everything is made, where it comes from. And transparency can only happen when there's a vested interest in the well-being of everyone. So what we have to do before we even jump into all these measures of how to incorporate this transparency in our supply chain is also see, how do we build our relationships? And, you know, in the future, for example, after this crisis, we may have less suppliers. So it might be more easy for some of you in the audience that work with brands or have your own brand, because you have less suppliers, because you have a smaller collection, to actually really hone in and focus and cherish those relationships with those fewer suppliers. Also, maybe a scenario in the future is that if we have smaller collections, then the designers can become, or the design team, various people in the cogwheel of the fashion brand can become agents of transparency. And rather than spend the whole year working on designing, they can spend part of the time becoming these agents of transparency, checking in with their suppliers. And there's some amazing brands that are already developing these incredibly healthy relationships. And it's not just about tracking people through technology. It's really working with them, understanding their needs. And when you look at nature, I just want to end with this. You know, transparency requires that we stop hiding, and that we stop being so competitive with each other, and that we share information. And we may think, oh my God, I'm losing something. I might be even losing my intellectual property, but it's about building trust. You know, you're building trust with others because you're showing what you're doing, even if it's not perfect, but you're showing what the goal that you're working towards too, and where you are in the present. But you're also trusting others with your information. And in nature, if we look at biomimicry and mimicking nature, when something is hiding, it's because it's under threat or is going off to die, or you know, it's just feeling attacked. It's not a positive experience. So we need to stop hiding, and we need to decide what we want to emulate and paint a picture of what we really want. And also, in terms of greenwashing, really look into that and understand critical thinking, because at this stage, until we are able to have trucks, everything using renewable energies, there's no way you can be 100% zero waste. So a company that claims they're 100% zero waste at the moment, right there's a problem. So I encourage everyone to really get a lot of information around this. So that's kind of my spiel on the topic. But you know, what about you?
Okay,
Like
thanks.
yeah, we talk about resilience. What does that mean to you?
Well, resilience is something interesting. I think we are speaking a lot today. I think it's Forbes that spoke about the isolation economy in opposition of the sharing economy that was there before. But I would prefer, instead of isolation economy, to have the idea of resilience economy. Resilience is it's coming from Latin, and it's meaning to rebound. It's the capacity, the ability to recover from adversity. So I think it's exactly what we need, because we are in a very difficult period with a very violent crisis. So we need to rebound. We need to find a way to recover. So we need resilience. And I would like to share with you, in fact, 3 major changes that are starting to be constructed with resilience. So one will be about urban landscape, the other one is about localism, and the third one is about eco-design. So as you know, the vast majority of us, we are living in big cities where, of course, it's more difficult to have a good social distancing because a lot of people at the same place. So what we see is that many cities all over the world want to give more space to people. So they want to give more space to bicycle with pop-up bike lanes. They want to give more space to pedestrian by getting sidewalks that are bigger. Bicycle is a very good alternative to public transportation because you bike alone, so that's very interesting. And also the fear of many people is that when we will be, the lockdown will end, many people will go back to their own individual private car, and this will be the comeback of pollution, which is bad also with the COVID. So what we see is that, for instance, in New York, the mayor of New York has implemented a pilot program for pedestrians to give them back the streets. It's the same also, for instance, in Milano. They are seeing the reopening of the outside with more space for restaurants, so that you can have social distancing, more space for pedestrian, more space for bike lane. Bogota is really somehow a kind of, they open about in one night a lot of bike lane for the people. So we see that in France now it's about 16 cities that are doing pop-up bike lane. So what I mean with that, this is really a resilient way of thinking the future. Because if you imagine the city with more bicycle, more space for pedestrian, less noise, less car, more space for restaurants and bars and small shops, that's a total different landscape of the city. The other thing, which is for me a sign of resilience, is also the comeback and the growing importance of localism. Many of us now are trying to find food that has been produced in the neighborhood. There is a need and a desire to be closer, to know what's happening around you. It's also the idea of having more autonomy, of bringing more solidarity, and finding a way to be more in connection with the people around you. So it's very much at the moment in the food business, but it's going also to be very important in tourism. In the months coming, the borders might be still closed, so many people are doing staycation or really going onto local tourism. So we see that localism is also an expression of this idea of resilience. And the third thing is more global, more how I would love to see the future with the notion of eco-design. So eco-design is really the idea of conceiving realistic objects and services to build something useful that is from the very beginning very well designed and very well thought to be as sustainable as possible. So I think now what we see is that maybe people are going to redesign architecture, to redesign cities, maybe to redesign parks and gardens into city, to have this idea of social distancing, to have all the needs that we need to have in the next months or maybe the next years. So for me, resilience is really something that would be a very good way to imagine our future with more, optimism somehow.
Yeah, and more long-term thinking, I guess, you know, because that's what resilience is about. It's really also implementing long-term thinking. But I really love the examples that you shared because they're such quick actions, quick, intelligent responses. And I wish the fashion industry could take inspiration from that. And I guess our examples are that we've canceled events, but we need to go much deeper. So
yeah, maybe it will be done in the second step.
Yes, and that's what everyone is trying to figure out, including us in this talk. But I guess we could move on to questions. We've got a couple interesting questions that came in. I think, should I go around with the first?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yusra asks, aren't brands using transparency as a tool to postpone becoming sustainable for now? While reading a lot of the reports, they don't really say anything about sustainability and focus how they improve the work environment of the people making the products, instead of saying what they will do towards the future to become sustainable. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think also what you're seeing is that a lot of brands are afraid to reveal everything they're doing or planning and doing because they're afraid of getting criticized. And that's part of the problem, because some brands are afraid of shouting out all the good stuff they do because it's not quite perfect yet. They're not quite there yet. And so they prefer to just talk about it when they release the information. And transparency, if it's just about giving access to all of the actions that you've taken place, it's not a measure. It has to be the end result of what you actually put in place. And the fact is that when you have high street fashions that have brands that have, you know, very high transparency rating, but if it doesn't change the fact that their workers are underpaid, there's a strong contradiction there. So, and it's unsustainable. So basically, we have to question that. It's our role also as end users, as member of the industry, as customers. We need to question that. We need to write letters, and we need to take action. You know, it's no longer a time to say I like this or I don't like this. It's a time of action.
And I think it brings up to the next question,
Yeah.
on how to develop education and relationship with the consumer who is already perhaps buying into a lot of greenwashing. I think it's somehow the same thing. I think it's education is starting really when you are a kid at school, and it's true that we should help young people to have more access to philosophy, to sociology, and to get the use of their brain to have a critical thinking. This is really important. So it starts really when you are very young at school, but then it can also be used with all kind of apps that are scanning the QR code of a product and telling you what is inside. And it's true that in the food industry, for instance, those apps has been doing a great job by really forcing industrial brand to be more transparent, sometimes also to revisit and redesign their own recipe or way of doing something. So I would say that education is key, and education can be made at every age. We should take care of the young one, but as an adult, we can also, like Geraldine said before, have our own voice, find the tools that are relevant and useful, and be active in a way.
What I do personally is I have a template letter. And even when I buy a product and it's a plastic packaging from an organic brand, but it didn't say clearly whether it's recyclable, if I see that, I write to them immediately. And oftentimes it is recyclable, but maybe it was produced in another country and they didn't put the right symbol or things like that. So I think also this idea of greenwashing, I just wanted to add to your answer, Cecile, because it's a huge issue. Because even when you look at people who use carbon offsetting, that's a form of greenwashing, unfortunately. Or people who say that they've been able to measure exactly all the carbon emissions and that their product is carbon emission free. That's just at this stage, because of the type of fuel used for transportation, it's just not possible. So when brands make these claims, we need to push back and say, great, that's amazing that you're doing that. Encourage them, but say, what are the metrics? And please, can you share them with us so that we can use them too? You know, really demand transparency. Shouldn't just be, here's what I done. It should be how I did it. And so I was speaking with a head of sustainability at a footwear brand yesterday, and she was saying there's a huge problem of corruption also with brands that say, I will hand over money to this charitable organization that plants trees, and no one knows exactly where the money is going. So that's just one of many examples.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a large question, and that maybe leads us to another question or remark. How would consumers have changed their behavior in a new reality, local product, end of sharing economy? I didn't say end, but I'm really slow down. More self-care. What else? I think we're facing also, just to be clear, a kind of economic crisis. It's not it's an economic crisis. So it means also that people might spend less money globally. This might be, for instance, like the COVID crisis is once again, it's putting a kind of acceleration on the trends that were already there. So, for instance, department stores were really in bad situation before the COVID. Many of them might die during the COVID. So I think, what else? Yeah, maybe less consumption, maybe the fact that people are starting to be more interested by things that are not things that you can buy, like family, like love, like partnership, like, joy, fulfillment, and things like that. So I think the change, we're going to see them for a certain months after the end of the confinement. Maybe at the end of the confinement, people are going to go and buy things for a while because it's a kind of, they would miss buying, so they go on buying, but at the end they would have spent weeks at home without buying, without purchasing, by also doing things by themselves. For some people it's the first time they are cooking themselves. For some people it's the first time they are doing bread. For some people it's the first time that in 2 weeks or 3 weeks they didn't buy anything. So I think the change in behavior, we're going to see them months after months. It's not just after the end of the confinement. It's an ongoing change of behavior.
Yeah, I think we have like 2 more questions. We have a couple of questions, but we're running a bit over time. So, but Maya's question was just, is this crisis going to push us into a more conservative era in terms of politics, economy, and fashion? Well, yes and no. I mean, there's always been these contradictions when you look even at the Great Depression, or for example, when alcohol was banned and repressed in America, it was still a great time of partying and other things. I mean, I actually don't think that this type of planetary flux that we're in is going to change the fact that we were already experiencing great paradoxes in terms of some great freedoms and advancements in our society, but then also totalitarianism kind of back on the rise. And this is a part of yeah.
And once again, I mean, this was already there before the COVID. I mean, conservative trends was already there. Trump was elected in US. There is this terrible president in Brazil. We have a right wing that is quite important in France, in Belgium, in Italy. So, I mean, this conservative direction was already there before the COVID. So I think it's just putting a deep light on the things that were already there. So I think, like Geraldine said, I mean, it's not all black or not all white. I mean, this is the world in which we are living is more complex than that. So it's not black or white, it's a mix of them, and it's all the gray shades in the middle. So I would say that there will be different reactions, different solutions, different way of acting and being after that confinement.
And it's something to track, because it's possible that because we are under so much pressure financially, that there will be some cracks socially, and we might see some civil unrest, further protesting once we're able to start doing that again. Because in order to pay for all of this money that's being pumped out to help people, some taxes are going to go up. So we'll see what happens with that. We've got a couple of other questions.
So we just take one last one, because otherwise we're going to...
Michelle was the next question.
Okay. I noticed in my experience that the majority of people mostly don't care about eco-design and sustainability. I live in Indonesia for almost 4 years, and eco-sustainability is still a topic for young and cool people, not for the majority. Yeah, right, we're not surprised, we know that. But I mean, when you have a trend, a long-term trend like sustainability is, you always have forerunners, you always have weak signals, and little by little it starts to be for more and more people. So it's true that right now I do understand that it's not a topic in Indonesia, like it's not a topic also maybe in some parts of China, but things are changing quickly also. I would say that it's really an ongoing process, and it's also what this COVID crisis is doing is that it's a kind of acceleration of everything, you know, acceleration of working from home, acceleration of maybe biking instead of taking your car, acceleration of thinking of local, acceleration of looking for the brands that do the good stuff, acceleration of being responsible of yourself. So it might be also an acceleration for sustainability in countries where it was just a word just for the happy few, and that it's going to be for more people, you know. I'm thinking like that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the civil rights movement, or if you look at women having the right to vote, it was a long process. And Martin Luther King used to talk about bending the arc of history. And this is a long process, and it's been a long road, and it's not a straight road. It's a sinuous road. It's like an elastic band. Sometimes it goes one way and it pops out the other, but it's an imperative, sustainability. It's an urgency, actually, if you look at the scientific facts. So that's why I guess we're having all these talks to try to, you know, push for a more ethical future. And sustainability is like one big word, but many are talking about regenerative systems or ethical. It all falls under this whole idea of the greater good. So I guess that wraps it up for today. But thank you everyone so much for coming. And I guess we'll post the replay as usual, and stay tuned because we're going to have a session next week.
Yeah, so we hope to see you next week, and we hope
Yeah.
that you enjoy. And we will keep also try to keep a list of resources and the things that we have been speaking about today. So thanks so much for being with us. We're happy to be there with you, all of you.
Yes, thank you everyone. And you know, we're saving the chat, and thank you so much everybody. And if there's any little questions that I saw, I'll try to like answer on the side possibly. Let's see what we can do. Otherwise we'll answer them next time. We will try to work.
Okay.
Bye everybody. Thank you so
Bye
much.
everybody.
Take good care. Stay safe.